Coming up, a bonus video this week as I was joined by Brendan Donnelly and Richard Hewison, the leader and the treasurer of the Rejoin EU Party, which is standing candidates again for election to the London Assembly on the 5th of May. We discussed the party's strategy for this and future elections, their thoughts on Sadiq Khan, and finally, we had a bit of fun looking at some of the anti-EU comments left on this channel from trolls who seem to have a fanatical interest in claiming that no one's interested in talking about Brexit anymore. Stay tuned. So, Brendan, Richard, welcome to the Truth to Power show. Thank you very much for coming along today. Would you just give maybe a quick introduction to yourselves for my viewers, a quick parkour, what's taken you in your career to where you are now? Who would like to start? Brendan?
Well, thank you very much for inviting us. I'm Brendan Donnelly. I, at the moment, am the director of a think tank called the Federal Trust. But in the dim and distant past, I used to be a Conservative MEP. It was a very different Conservative Party in those days. In those days, the Conservative Party was the party of Europe, and that was the basis on which I joined it all those years ago. And because I was active in it in the European Parliament, I know that many of the things that are said about it are simply not true, or so grossly exaggerated as to be the equivalent of being untrue. One of the things that worries me about public opinion in this country is that it's been turned in an anti-European direction by 30 years of propaganda. You can only describe it as Goebbels-esque propaganda about Europe, which I know not to be true. And it's one of the things that I think our party, the Rejoin EU Party, has a role in combating and contradicting.
Thank you very much, Brendan. And Richard?
Up to the referendum in 2016, I saw no need for myself to be politically involved. Obviously, after the Brexit referendum and the appalling direction that the country's gone in since there, where most of our politicians have just raced around like headless chickens for 8 years, not knowing what to do or what direction to go in, I got to the stage in 2020 when I thought, well, actually, I have no one I can vote for in the upcoming elections, which were the London elections. We set up the Rejoin EU Party as a vehicle to protest Brexit. So when we get the opportunity to stand for by-elections, we do so. And of course, these mayoral elections, we're standing in London because, again, although we've got some positive pro-European noises from some of the major candidates for mayor, which is why we're not standing for that, we still need the London Assembly to have a kick and have someone there to say, oi, let's talk about Europe, let's talk about it sensibly, let's rejoin. So that's where we are today.
Do you find it, I mean, just from a general spectator's point of view, you look at the mainstream media in this country and it seems to be, you look at something like Question Time or any of the politics shows come to that on the BBC, there seems to be an overrepresentation of people from the right. I mean, the number of times that Nigel Farage pops up or somebody from one of the Tufton Street opaquely funded think tanks, as they call them. So what's going on there? I mean, why is it so difficult for something like Rejoin EU Party to get on there?
You're absolutely right that Nigel Farage was on Question Time in the period when he was a British MEP, incomparably more than all the other British MEPs put together, representing a party which had no MPs. It's quite extraordinary that the BBC was so willing to give him a platform. But the lesson I draw from what you're saying is that in spite of that, there are consistent majorities in the opinion polls in favour of rejoining the European Union.
Absolutely.
Where do we think public opinion would be if there were some sort of equity, some sort of balance in representation in the mass media?
Yes.
And I think that when things change, when suddenly the politicians come to realize that there are votes to be lost in being anti-European and votes to be won in being pro-European, there'll be quite a sudden avalanche in the other direction. And we've just got to keep on pushing.
I hope you're right. I mean, one of my biggest frustrations, we're not here to talk about other political parties, but you wonder why Ed Davey and Keir Starmer have just not taken this fantastic opportunity.
They're very risk averse. The idea is that they're worried that they will be monstered, as they put it, by the tabloid press. And I think if they had a bit thicker skin, a bit thicker hide, they'd realise that it's not so bad politically to be attacked sometimes, because it means you're politically relevant and you're saying things that people don't want you to be saying, and that's what democratic debate's all about.
I mean, it is as if the BBC took a vow of silence the night of the referendum and said, right, we're never going to discuss this again. Let's sweep it under the carpet. And that, of course, I think has led into the political arena whereby the media ask no questions about Brexit and the main political parties give them no information about Brexit. And yet, as you say, we're now in a situation where virtually 2/3 of the population would vote to rejoin, were we to have another referendum tomorrow. When you put it, Rob, in the way, why are we not on TV all the time? Maybe we're just not weird enough for the audience to be interested, like UKIP were back in the day. But it has to be said, the lack of balance in the debate worries me deeply. Indeed, the only channel that regularly actually invites us on is GB News, and of course that's mainly because they want it. Oh, let's get the bad guys on. Let's boo them and throw tomatoes at them. But it is a very, very warped media environment we're in at the moment.
Right, that's obvious every single day. The sort of characters that pop up from these think tanks, as I say, and from the right wing. Where are the Green Party? Where are the Rejoin EU Party representatives? They're not there. I hope I'm not being unfair when I say this, but obviously you've set yourselves up as a single issue party, as it were, policy to rejoin the EU. So what's the strategy?
I'll take that in terms of London at the moment, because as you know, we are standing in the London elections at the moment. We're standing on the constituency list, which basically means we need to get 5% of the vote to get one person on the London Assembly. That is going to be an uphill struggle because we've been denied a party election broadcast this time, which does hamstring us a fair amount in London. But were we to get one of the 25 seats on the London Assembly, then our representative on the London Assembly could force the London Assembly to talk about the issue. You can't force them to vote in favour of it, but you can force it onto the agenda. And I would say one of the first things we should do is get the London Assembly to ask London-wide, do you want to do something about the EU? Let's talk about the relationship. Should we rejoin? Let's lead the national debate on this. And obviously, if we could get people of goodwill on the Assembly, and I'm sure that there will be Green, Lib Dem, and even Labour members on the Assembly that would like to see the question reopened. The only thing is, none of them would ever be prepared to propose it. So we could end up with one of us on the London Assembly getting a London-wide e-consultation on whether we should rejoin the EU, and to do that right in front of a general election, I think would really put the Starmers, the Davies, into a very awkward position. They'll have to talk about the issue as we go into our next general election.
In some ways, we see ourselves as being the equivalent on the other side of the argument as UKIP. We're, as it were, nipping at the heels of the other parties and hoping to persuade them that there's a penalty attached to ignoring Europe. And when you say it's a single issue party, of course it's a single issue party, but what a single issue. Yes. Because it's one that has ramifications in the whole of British politics. Yes. And I'd say that the greatest harm that Brexit has done to the United Kingdom is in reducing the quality of our political life, because it's not by chance that we have people like Truss and Sunak and Johnson and even May being prime ministers in a post-Brexit Britain, because Brexit is geared around lies and fantasy. You can't keep it going without lies and fantasy, and that distorts the whole of our political argumentation. It's not even just the Conservatives anymore. Other parties are infected by this need not to talk about something that's embarrassing and to pretend it can be made to work.
As time goes on, more and more of the remarks that are left in my comments section seem to be from people that are very Brexity still. Why they're wasting their time, as it were, watching my videos when I'm coming from such a pro-EU point of view, beggars belief. I mean, but they seem to have nothing better to do than read these comments. So I think, why are you watching the videos? Can I possibly just float some of the comments I've had literally just today on the channel and just see what your response would be to these people? For example, Linda Ward says, the EU is a non-democratic globalist dictatorship. Now, I get loads of comments like that, probably most of them from the same troll factory in Moscow. But what would you say to that? The EU is a non-democratic globalist dictatorship. Brendan, you've worked there. You're very familiar with it.
It is a democratic organisation in the sense that the decisions which are taken by the European Parliament and by the democratically elected government ministers who are responsible. It's certainly not a dictatorship, because one of the problems about Brussels, if you like, is that it is so small. It has a smaller civil service than a medium-sized British town, and very often it isn't able centrally to enforce its will. And quite often, a criticism of the European Commission is that it's ineffective. That people ignore it, that people don't do enough to respect its powers. I don't think it's a globalist organization. It is one that inclines towards economic liberalism. That's right, and that's true about the way the European Union works. Now, that used to be something that conservatives were very much in favor of. Now they're standing on their head and saying that it's protectionism, it's British protectionism, or perhaps American protectionism that they're in favor of. So no, I wouldn't accept any of those particular criticism. But I think it's interesting that people are now willing to put these comments on your channel. That bespeaks and reflects a lack of confidence.
Yes.
Sometimes people, in putting these questions, are trying to convince themselves.
Yes.
Because, as you rightly say, if they were so sure you were wrong, they'd just laugh at you indulgently and not bother to engage with you.
I think the comments from Linda in particular are interesting. First of all, perhaps not the best time for Linda to make them, as we're just about to go into the biggest set of democratic elections Europe-wide for 5 years. It's a little bit difficult to level that charge there. And all I would point back to is I personally value the days when in London I could take part in a genuinely fair election, whereby even if my voice wasn't the strongest, one of the 6 MEPs elected on a PR basis would be someone that would reflect my views, and I would be able to go directly to that MEP to ask them questions, and that MEP directly held into account and indeed voted for the president of the commission at that stage. I compare that to the UK system, where certainly my MP is never someone I would have voted for. My MP never had a say in who becomes prime minister or who doesn't become prime minister in the UK. And so to say that the EU is undemocratic when we look at the UK, you couldn't stretch irony further when we acknowledge that we have a prime minister who not only has never been elected prime minister by the public, has been specifically rejected as prime minister by his own party. One of the things I noticed recently, I put out just one tweet on Twitter, and it was quite a good-natured tweet, lots and lots of people responding. We had quite a good conversation, and I watched the engagements go up. And when it reached a certain level, suddenly loads and loads of trolls came in, almost as if they were auto-generated to note a positive pro-EU tweet once it gets to a certain level to do that. So I would say congratulations on triggering whatever level the bots have there, Rob. But whether these are actually real people or not, I remain skeptical.
No, I agree. As I say, I think a lot of them are from the same troll factory in Moscow, I think. But there we go.
On our YouGov channel, we're always very amused to get people saying, nobody takes any notice of you. Well, obviously, there's somebody who's taken some notice because they thought it worth complaining.
Yeah, I get that a lot as well. Yeah. Now, just coming from a slightly different angle, I always find this a bit sad, but a lot of EU citizens leave comments like this one from EU Citizen 78, who says, "All I hear is moaning and whining of what they have lost. By now, I think the UK don't deserve the EU and you should stay where you are." I find that very sad, but what's your reaction to that?
To a certain extent, I understand why that might be, because the amount of spiteful rhetoric that's come out from the UK about our citizens and colleagues who are of European origin, you can't just sit and swallow all of that stuff. We took away those people's right to vote in this referendum. People who have made their homes in Britain, we said, you're not good enough to vote on a referendum about your own future. And then there was a lot of bile spouted in their direction. So I can understand.
I think some of the foreign commentary that you get on social media along these lines, in fact, is not from real people. I think it is from bots. I think that there is a strategy being pursued, maybe Russian inspired, whoever it's inspired by, that if you tell the British there's absolutely no chance of rejoining the European Union, then they're less likely to be interested in it. They'll just resign themselves to it. And certainly it's something that you often get from Eurosceptics who are saying, well, they'll never have us back anyway. And that's simply wrong. The people that you are talking about, insofar as they represent genuine public opinion, don't represent on the whole governmental opinion. I think there are two extremes that people go to. They'll never have us back, or they can't wait to get us back. Neither of those is right. It's in between. Richard's right that there's a fund of distrust because we have behaved, or the government has behaved very badly over the past 8 years, and that can't be without consequences. But on the other hand, people know that it will be a tremendous feather in the cap of the European Union if the British came back. And the British, if they're prepared to work with others, have a contribution, a real contribution to make. So there are obstacles to be surmounted, but they're certainly not insurmountable.
Another one I get a lot, Dean 9265 and several others. Usually they've got lots of numbers in the name, so as you said, they're real people. But wow, are people still banging on about Brexit? It's happened. You lost. Get over it. What's your reaction to
Well, I agree with David Davis, the prominent Eurosceptic, that when a democracy can't change its mind, it ceases to be a democracy.
Yeah.
So as far as I'm concerned, there's absolutely no reason why people who want to rejoin shouldn't imitate the people who spent from 1975 to 2016 banging on about it.
Absolutely.
They didn't accept the democratic will of the majority. And in a way, why should they? As long as they protest democratically, as we're doing, they've every right to expect that their voice will be heard.
Yeah,
totally. And I'd also remind Dean 994726 that the only person who was quicker to demand another referendum on Europe than ourselves was Nigel Farage, who was on the wireless before the result had even been out, demanding that we talk about it again and have another referendum. And Brendan's right. Democracies can always change their mind. Otherwise, they cease to be democracies.
But there might be an argument for saying that if Brexit had not taken place, then that would have been illegitimate because there was a referendum decision. But it did take place. And let's, as you say, move on from that and look at how Brexit is going. And if we conclude that it's simply a disaster, why on earth should we be prevented or be reluctant to review that and reverse it?
But Brendan, did Brexit happen? Because according to Hans Schell, none of our feckless politicians believed in Brexit. The people who voted for it was stitched up. And Chris the Saxon, we haven't had a Brexit. I mean, it sounds like the 7 stages of denial of death, but there are a lot of people out there that say Brexit hasn't happened yet.
They used to say the same about communism, didn't they? That Marxism was a very good idea, but it was just distorted and it never happened and it was never put into operation. And no, the trouble is that Brexit has happened.
Right.
And we can see what's wrong with it, that it's an unmitigated disaster. There would never be a way of constructing Brexit to the satisfaction of your correspondent, because Brexit is based on so many incoherences and aspects of self-harm that it's never going to be possible to make it work.
Right.
And indeed, if we look at these concepts that people had as to what Brexit's going to be, everyone's simultaneously saying, well, that's not the Brexit I voted for. Unfortunately, this was exactly what you voted for. It was what was predicted at the time. But I do worry that we actually see another parallel in our politics at the moment, because let's be frank, we know we're going to get a Starmer government in the near future, and anyone who's going to vote for it has a radically different idea as to what that government is going to deliver. Yes. And again, I think about 18 months down the line, we're going to be in the situation where we have another huge majority in Parliament with another government that's not going in the direction they want. And I think we're going to hear, this isn't the Labour government I voted for. And again, we're not learning our lessons here. And this is why we really want to try and nail down some of our politicians before the election on what they're going to do on issues, not just including Brexit, but issues including PR, issues including the Constitution. And I think we're being very badly let down now. So the one thing I would agree with that correspondent is we are being very badly let down by our feckless politicians. That much I will definitely agree with them. The only thing I would add was it was totally predictable how this would unfold from 2016 in terms of what sort of chaos we would get.
Now, if people want to look into the Rejoin EU Party a bit further, if they want to get involved, what would you suggest they do? Obviously, your website, the rejoineUparty.com, put that up on the screen. What do you suggest they do? How do they get in touch? How do they get involved?
Now, that's from one end of the spectrum where you can say, right, There's no one in my constituency that represents me. I want to stand in my constituency. I want to challenge the status quo. I want to use your label. And to them, we would say, as long as you are pro-EU and as long as you do not promote bigotry and intolerance elsewhere, that's the other must in our party. You cannot be part of our party and promote bigotry and intolerance. You may use that label to challenge your local MP. On a more moderate end of the scale, there's some people who just say, well, I'd like to get involved. I'd like to come along. I'd like to actually feel like I'm doing something. Anytime we stand in an election, by-election or the general election, you will be more than welcome to join us putting out leaflets. And we have a lot of people that just like to join us on social media and use Twitter or potentially YouTube to accelerate the pro-EU voice. So quite frankly, we're grateful for any interest that people show in us. But obviously, if you're a multi-millionaire that wants to give away all your wealth, that would be terribly useful as well. So.
There is a questionnaire on the website which helps us to gauge opinions and is an opportunity for people to get in touch with us and if they want to offer whatever help they can.
Would you mind if I just gave a brief explanation of how the London election works?
It's please do, Richard. Yeah.
One of the things we have found is because of the technical nature of the election, some voters are confused as to what we're actually doing. So I just want to put the London campaign specifically into context. This time last year, I was stating that I was going to run for Mayor of London and I was going to get the pro-EU message up and I was going to stand against Sadiq Khan. And Alex Kerr, who makes a lot of videos, was going to be standing for Deputy Mayor at that time. Now, of course, since then, first of all, Sadiq Khan has made some very pro-European speeches, as has the Green candidate Zoe, and they are both very pro-EU. And given the change to the first past the post, we're not in that election. So if people say, you know, oh, we could get that dreadful person as Conservative mayor, why are you splitting the vote? The answer is we're not. We're not in the main ballot for mayor. We're in the ballot for the Assembly election. So there's 3 ballot papers. The mayor, you won't see us on. The second one is to elect 14 members of the Assembly across London on a first past the post election. That's your sort of traditional Labour, Green, Lib Dem, Conservative head-to-heads. Again, we're not involved in that. We're not trying to split any votes in the constituency. We are only standing on the supplementary top-up list, which is for the 11 that go together with the 14 to make up the Assembly. And the idea of that list is that any party, could be that's already got a seat, but any party that gets above 5% basically is guaranteed a seat on the London Assembly. So you can vote for us on ballot 3. You can vote to make your views on rejoining the EU clear. That doesn't affect whether you vote Labour for mayor, Green for mayor, Lib Dem for mayor. Doesn't affect how you vote in the constituency. And particularly, I would say, and I will be a little bit partisan here, if you are a Labour-minded voter, Labour are likely to do so well on the second ballot, it's going to be almost unfeasible for them to get a significant amount of extra seats on the third ballot. So if you're voting Labour for mayor, Labour for the constituency, please consider us for the third ballot.
Yes, it's an irony of the system that the better you do on the second ballot, on the directly elected portion of the election, the less efficient your vote for the same party becomes with your third ballot. It's much more efficient to vote for smaller parties. And Richard's quite right to draw attention to the way in which Sadiq Khan has been saying some very pro-European things. I suspect a little bit of pressure has been put on him from within his own party hierarchy to rein that back. Well, I think he might even be quite welcoming of a voice whispering in his ear from the Assembly saying you should be even more pro-European than you've been up till now.
Now, last time in the London Assembly, 18 parties stood, and we came 6th out of those 18, which for a first time out was not bad, I think. Now, we were never going to beat the big 4, Labour, Lib Dem, Green, and the Tories. And if you're Sadiq Khan and you're thinking, right, it could be a close election, who do I need to talk to here? Well, the 5th party, the Women's Equality Party, they're not standing in the election this time round. So you go to number 6, Rejoin EU, and it makes perfect sense for him to start speaking there. Now, as I say, I'm not claiming that that's because of us, but the pressure we built in 2021, I hope had some impact on his attitude in 2024. And if people want to keep that pressure up, I would say a strong vote for us on the list is a very effective way to do so.
My sincere thanks to Brendan Donnelly and Richard Hewison, leader and treasurer of the Rejoin EU Party respectively, and let's hope they get a lot of pro-European voters giving the party their vote on that third ballot paper for the top-up places on the London Assembly. Thanks for watching. Please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. I'll be publishing the weekly Truth to Power video as usual this Saturday at 9 AM BST. If there's anything particular you think I should be talking about this week, then let me know below.